This is Mark Crescenzi's POLI 150H lesson accompanying Chapter 5 of Bruce Bueno de Mesquita's Principles of International Politics, 5th edition. Why does war happen? The existence and recurrence of major conflict between states is perhaps the biggest puzzle in international relations. International war represents a tremendous breakdown in cooperation and is an extremely costly way to resolve a problem. In this lesson, we'll look briefly at two major structural theories of war, neorealism and power transition theory. Then we'll consider three explanations for why wars occur from a rational choice perspective. Collectively, these theories provide important insight on when and why nations fight. In Chapter 5, BDM introduces two structural theories of war. Realist theories of war emphasize the anarchic nature of the international system, that states are rational and unitary actors operating within this system, that states seek to maximize security, and that they also seek to increase their influence on the international system. These basic assumptions lead to a few key concepts that are critical for understanding a neorealist perspective on international conflict. First, because the international system is anarchic and states don't like to be in a weak position, when a state rises in power, others will naturally balance against it. This phenomenon is known as balance of power theory. It's illustrated most aptly by the alliance formations that arose to counterbalance each other leading up to World War I and World War II. Second, neorealists are often concerned with the structure of the international system. In particular, most traditional neorealist literature suggests that a bipolar system, in which there are two dominant states, is the most stable international system. According to neorealists, bipolarity reduces the amount of international conflict because it reduces the number of dominant actors in the system, therefore mitigating uncertainty, an issue we'll return to later. Finally, the assumption that states wish to maximize security and influence leads to a phenomenon known as the security dilemma. If State A watches its neighbor, State B, amass power, how can State A be sure that State B won't start encroaching on its own territory? By this logic, shifts in power can create instability in an anarchic international environment, which can ultimately lead to conflict. Before moving on, discuss with your small group what elements of realist explanations for conflict you find compelling and what elements it lacks. Is this a good illustration of how states operate? Pause the video for a minute to discuss. Power transition theory differs from neorealist theories in a few key ways. First, rather than viewing the world as filled with unitary rational states, power transition theories further suggest that the world can be divided into satisfied and dissatisfied states. According to most scholars, satisfaction depends largely on power and influence in the international system. Second, instead of operating in an anarchic world, the rules of the international system are largely dictated by the dominant state and other satisfied states that support it. Following from these assumptions, power transition theorists suggest that war is most likely to occur when the status quo, the way the international system operates currently, is being challenged by a dissatisfied state. The transition period whereby the challenging state becomes roughly equal to or exceeds the capabilities of the dominant state presents the highest risk of war, hence power transition theory. How convincing do you find the explanations that follow from power transition theory? Pause the video and discuss power transition theory in relation to realist explanations for war. What do you find more compelling? Can you think of historical examples to support your claims? We'll devote the remainder of this lesson to discuss rational choice explanations for war. While we might not agree how or why wars occur in the international system, we can all agree that there are inefficient ways to solve a problem. By inefficient, I mean that wars represent a bargaining failure over a particular issue at stake. After the fact, we can look back at the outcome reached and realize that the same bargain could be struck without incurring the costs of fighting. In a well-known article, James Fearon summarizes three rationalist explanations for why wars occur despite this inefficiency: information problems or uncertainty, commitment problems, and indivisible issues. To illustrate these explanations, consider a very simplified version of the India-Pakistan dispute over Kashmir. This represents the bargaining space with the ideal points of India and Pakistan marked. We can mark a range of acceptable agreements for each country. The overlapping range is called the zone of agreement. If there is a zone of agreement, we can expect that there is a compromise that is preferable to war. Now we can illustrate the three rationalist explanations for war on this bargaining space. The simplest explanation is to envision what occurs when an issue is thought to be indivisible. Some scholars debate the idea that anything can be truly indivisible, but we'll leave that argument aside for this illustration. In this case, there is no zone of agreement. The two countries both feel so intensely about an issue that they would prefer to continue fighting rather than see a bargain being struck. Issue indivisibility is often associated with intense nationalistic fervor or ethnic homelands. The second explanation focuses on information problems or uncertainty. In this bargaining space, the problem is that India doesn't know what Pakistan's range of acceptable outcomes looks like, and vice versa. In fact, both countries have incentives to misrepresent the way they truly feel in order to get a more favorable outcome. They could issue statements proclaiming that they are unwilling to budge, or send other costly signals such as mobilizing troops. When this happens, the bargaining space starts to appear like there's no zone of agreement, and bargaining starts to break down. The third explanation arises from commitment problems. Let's say this is the status quo on the Kashmir issue. But suddenly, Pakistan starts rapidly acquiring nuclear weapons. How can India not be sure that Pakistan won't want to shift the status quo to a place that's more favorable for them? In fact, in this scenario, India may even have an incentive to engage in a preventative war in order to neutralize a growing threat. This fear of the future can also cause a bargaining failure and lead to interstate conflict. If you need to review or discuss these three explanations with your small group, feel free to pause the video before moving forward. What you should take away from this video is that explaining the outbreak of a single war starts to become very complicated when you look at it from all of these different angles. Let's consider a war we're all very familiar with, World War II. Which theoretical explanation for the outbreak of World War II is the most compelling? Was it the unstable balance of power and web of alliances? Was it the fact that Germany was a dissatisfied challenger that posed a threat to other dominant European states? Was it the commitment problems inherent in the attempts to appease Hitler? Or did Hitler view Nazi expansionism as an indivisible group, and that he could never actually be appeased and dominance of Europe was an all-or-nothing ambition? For the next few minutes, finish up with your small group by discussing how you would go about evaluating different explanations for the outbreak of war. How would we be able to test different IR theories? Are there other compelling explanations for war that we've missed?